Okay, so now we're going to do part 2 of chapter P, section 7, and we're solving a formula for a variable. So here we're given a formula, and it's asking us to solve for b. So I want to get b by itself. So I'm trying to break everything off this side of the equation until b is the only thing that's left. First thing I can do is multiply both sides by 2. So now I have 2a equals h times a plus b. Well, now I need to get rid of the h, and I can divide both sides by h, and that gets rid of it here. And now I have 2a over h is equal to a plus b. And the last step in getting it by itself, we have 2a over h. Subtracting a from both sides, we get b by itself. Okay. Now, if you wanted to here, you could create a common denominator and write it together as a single fraction, but you don't have to. Now, when we're solving equations with absolute value, the first thing we want to do is get the absolute value by itself. And then we're going to write two equations. The first equation, all we do is get rid of the absolute value and solve. The second equation, we remove the absolute value, multiply the side that didn't have absolute value by -1, and then we can solve. And we have to check our answers. So let's look at an example of that. Here we have solve the absolute value equations and check your answers. And right now my absolute value is not by itself, so that's what I want to do first. I can subtract 3, and then I have 2x minus 3 equals 10. And dividing both sides by 2, I end up with x minus 3 in absolute value equals 5. Now my absolute value is by itself, so I want to write two equations. So I'm going to have x minus 3 equals 5, and I'm going to have x minus 3 equals -5. Okay. And those are following the directions that we were just looking at. So I can add 3 to both sides, and I get x equals 8, and I can add 3 to both sides, and I get x equals -2. And now I want to check both of these and make sure that they work. So plugging in 8 minus 3 is 5. Absolute value of 5 is 5. Times 2 is 10. Plus 3 is 13. That one works. And -2. -2 minus 3 is -5. Absolute value of -5 is 5. Times 2 is 10. Plus 3 is 13. That one works as well. So we're going to go ahead and work through this next example as well. First thing I want to do is subtract 6, and I get absolute value of x plus 1 is equal to -4. Now right off the bat, and a little alarm should be going off in your head because there's no way to get a negative number out of an absolute value. So if the absolute value is by itself and it's equal to something negative, then we know that we have no solution. Okay. Now, we're used to looking at quadratic equations, and this is the general form of a quadratic equation. The zero product property tells us that if I have two things being multiplied equal to 0, then one of them or both of them have to equal 0. So when we're solving quadratic equations, first thing we want to do is write it in this form so that there's a 0 on one side. We always want to pull out the GCF first and factor, and then we're going to set our factors equal to 0, solve, and check our answers. So let's go through some examples. And this is the end of chapter P, part 2.